Cara, Michelle Icard is just delightful. I don't have a better word. I mean, I have many bright and interesting and empathic and funny and real, but the conversation with her about adolescent failures was so joyful. And who would have imagined that to be the case?
I can't wait for people to listen. I think, Vanessa, part of the reason you think it was a delightful conversation was that she referred to our book as a really wonderful resource. So there's that. You can listen for that reference. But Michelle has a really, really refreshing take on what failure and success look like. And these are tropes that parents and adults who love tweens and teens hear about all the time. But it becomes increasingly important to frame them in the world in which we're living. How do you actually let a kid fail? Why should you actually let a kid fail? What's the downside to not? And what does success look like without failure? And these are all conversations that we get into with someone who has a degree in education, has worked with parents and children and teachers for 2 decades, who creates curriculum, who's written 3 books, who runs programs and a 13,000 member Facebook group, whose parents are engaged in hard, tricky conversations. So we hope you enjoy hearing Michelle's take on the exact thing that her new book covers, 8 setbacks that can make a child, I would also say tween, I would also say teen, and I would also say young adult, a success.
Enjoy.
Michelle, we're so excited to have you here.
Hello, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Full disclosure, Cara, we share an editor.
Yes, we share a book editor. We do. Whom we love.
Hi,
Shout out.
We love you. And I had forgotten that until right now. We do that. So that's really cool.
Shout out to Marnie. Michelle, I feel like we all should have known each other for a long time, although we're really just talking for the very first time on this podcast. But there are about 100 reasons why I knew we would really love you and what you have to say. And one of them is in the introduction of your newest book, which is 8 Setbacks That Can Make a Child a Success. I'll hold it up right here for the YouTubers. And I want to read the first half of a list that you write in your introduction that is described as the things you know to be true about kids and failure. 1, all kids mess up. 2, all parents mess up. 3, your child is amazing. 4, your child is also annoying. So that's how I knew we'd be friends. Because
it was like my life philosophy summed up in 4 lines. I had this hilarious conversation with my kids the other day because we were talking about favorites and like, are there favorites? I have 4 kids, Michelle. And so we were all sitting around the table and they're like, we know you always say you don't have favorites, but like, come on, do you have favorites? And I was like, it's impossible to have favorites, guys, because there are times when one of you is awesome. And then the next minute you could be so annoying. Like, how could you possibly be my favorite? And you rotate. Like, no one is great all the time and no one is annoying all the time. And so there's no way to have favorite. And they couldn't tell whether they should be like offended by that statement or relieved by that statement. But I think they felt like it was honest.
I am positive that they love it because not only is it honest and it sort of breaks through the pressure to be the favorite, but it also provides the opportunity to sometimes be the favorite, which is what every kid wants.
There's always a chance.
Yeah, maybe this is the week. And we used to say in my house, I have 2 kids who are now out of the house, in finishing up college and in the middle of law school. So they're sort of intermittently home on breaks and things like that. But we used to say that whenever one kid was in trouble, the other kid was polishing their halo. They were just working so hard to show you what a good kid they were.
My kids, when they were in middle school, used to do that thing where they would steal my phone and change the contact information for different people. Yes. And when they got their own phones, they renamed themselves in the contact. And my daughter remains to this day favorite child.
Yes.
But my son to one up her, simply moved himself to the top of my favorites list.
Yes.
So that favorite is implied. There you go.
Yeah, he's
deep.
such a favorite. You don't even have to say.
That's deep. Yeah.
That is deep. That's good. I like it.
So the book is called hold on, I'm going to pull it up. I'm going to show it also for people on YouTube. 8 Setbacks That Can Make a Child a Success. Love the cover, by the way. Thank you, Marnie. But you talk a lot about failure in the book. And I want to start there because we're raising a generation of kids and we're parenting as a generation of parents where the word failure is like, my God, like that word doesn't get uttered or expressed.
It's the F word.
It's the F word. Yes.
It sure doesn't make it to the cover unless it's in quotes at the tippity top in very small font. So I wanted failure to be all over the cover. I wanted it to be called the other F word or something. And I really wanted to destigmatize the idea of talking about our kids screwing up, face planting, whatever, however you want to think about failure, a setback, a challenge, a face plant, a screw up, an F up, whatever you want. I think
the other F word is brilliant, by the way.
But it didn't make the cut. And okay, so partly I can understand. The publishers were worried that parents would be scared their kids would see that and think, oh, my mom or dad thinks I'm a screw up.
Oh,
so
fair. Another F word.
Fair. That's fair. It's not fun. I wanted it to be a little bit more fun. But whenever I talk about this book, I say we call it Setbacks because it's not an itchy word. We're a little bit more comfortable with it. But I am really talking about what I consider to be failures. And they're not unique. They are universal throughout adolescence, and they range in variety from failure to connect with peers to failure to get along with your family, which are pretty common and pretty subtle, to the more shocking, upsetting ones, like failure to take care of your body, failure to follow the rules. So that's what I'm talking about there. But I know that word carries a lot of stigma. So I had to be careful.
And you differentiate between failure and setbacks from a matter of perspective rather than a matter of the innate experience. Like failure is when you're in it. Setback is how you can view it in the rear view mirror. Can you talk about that? Because I want to get into the concept of failure, but I think that framing is like very affirming for those of us who are, messily getting through this stage of raising kids.
It's all messy, that's for sure. And that's okay because practice is messy. And this is what kids are doing. They're practicing becoming grown-ups. And so it's going to be sloppy and they're going to make mistake after mistake. And even when you think they should know better by now, they continue to make the same mistake. And that's how we learn. But what I mean by failure is that you've sort of reached a territory where you feel like, oh, my child has hit some bumps in the road. They've had a couple setbacks or they've had a couple issues or challenges. And then it becomes apparent to you that you have enough of a trend that you think, my kid might now be in a space where they're starting to feel like they aren't providing value because of this issue, or they're not finding joy because of this issue. So if it's failure to connect with peers, which was the example I used earlier, you might notice, oh gosh, my kid used to be friends with this person. Now they're not anymore. Totally normal. And then you might notice, oh, my kid is trying to make new friends, but no one's coming over. No one's available when they ask to do something. And after you see it a few times, then you think we might be entering a failure territory where my kid will start to think, I am this, not I've had this experience, but I am someone who doesn't make friends. And now I believe that to be a truth about myself. That's when we get into failure.
And it runs up against a different use of the word in the bigger social parlance, which is sort of this embracing of failure, but that this is sort of more failure with a lowercase f instead of your failure with a capital F. And the embracing of failure is, you have to fail in order to succeed. You have to trip in order to catch yourself. This is how we learn. You tell outstanding stories throughout the book, one of which involves turkeys, that really just solidify this idea of no matter how successful things are for us, the thing we remember is the failure. The thing that imprints on us is the failure. So it makes sense, circling back to sort of the naming of all of it, it does make sense that we have to be cautious with how we use this word. And yet your redefinition and recasting of the word is really important because it's not a bad word. The negativity of it is the weight that it puts on kids' shoulders when they define themselves as the thing, as the failure of a person. And this is, of course, as we parent or adult them, right? So even for non-parent caregivers and coaches and mentors and educators, like, how do you remove that from their shoulders while still helping them to learn the lessons and thread the needle through life?
Yes, you've said it perfectly. And I would add that it's the child who might begin to think, oh, I am a failure because of this, but also part of what makes it tricky to deal with this topic is that parents are really afraid of talking about when their child experiences a failure of any kind because they don't want their kid to be typecast.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want this to be the headline of their kid's childhood. Oh, my kid, sent nudes and now the school knows. So like that's very hush hush. And I'm certainly not suggesting that people get a megaphone or go on Facebook and say, uh-oh, my kid sent nudes or whatever. My kid's struggling with disordered eating or my kid is isolated and doesn't have friends right now. But to a person that I interviewed, every parent I spoke with said the moment they started to feel better about what their child was struggling with was the moment they told someone. And so it doesn't have to be loud in public, but you at least need to find a person or two you can confide in. So you can say, this is what we're dealing with. And you'll be surprised when you do that, how people want to help and how people have experienced something similar.
Yeah. I mean, we say to people all the time, like we tell kids to find their trusted adults. We need to find our own trusted adults. And you use a term in the book, fear triage, which I really appreciated, partially because I knew Cara would be excited because triage is a medical term.
Getting the medical terms out. Yeah.
It's an awesome, awesome phrase.
Yeah. But it spoke to me on such a deep level about how we as caregivers deal with our kids' failures, because so much of it is the story we begin to write for ourselves and our kids and our families in response to that failure. And so can you talk, Michelle, about this concept of fear triage and how we as adults, you talked about find a trusted friend, don't, as Jenny Wallace likes to say, don't worry alone. What does that look like? What does that sound like? And how do we both do that and protect our kids' privacy in these vulnerable moments?
So it's really sort of a two-part answer, but in terms of finding your person, I call that using the whisper network. So you might find someone who you trust to say, do you know any other parent I could talk to who's been through this? My son is smoking pot in his bedroom every day, and I don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And everyone says, go to your pediatrician or go to a counselor. And those are great tips, yes. But often what we want is someone who can share that feeling with us, not just expert advice, but we need a release for the pressure that's building up. So finding somebody in a whisper network where someone can say, I do know who you can talk to. I'm going to put you in touch so you guys can just vent a little bit and let some of that off of your chest. That's hugely important. And then the piece about fear triage is really about what you as the parent do when you discover your child is entering a failure territory, whatever it is. Often what we do is we spin out of control and we start to worry about, as you mentioned, the future that is unwritten. So we say, oh my gosh, my kid is such a pain in the ass. They don't talk to me nicely. They're rude to everyone. Everything I do for my kid, they reject. We used to be so close. They're never going to speak to me again. I'll never know my grandkids. When they turn 18, they're going to move out of the house and that'll be that. So we make all of these wild assumptions. And my advice is to think about the vast number of things that you're worried about, to write them down on a phone or in a journal, get them out of your head, then look at that list and make it a brainstorm. Put everything on that list. And then look at it and say, of these, is there anything I can take action on in the next 24 hours that might help? Like if I'm looking at all of these things that I'm afraid of with my kid being such a jerk, and one of the things that I'm worried about is whether or not I'll get to talk to my grandkids, There's nothing I can do about that in the next 24 hours. So I'm going to give myself some time to not think about it. And I'll say, I'll revisit that one in a year or whatever time you want.
So I want to wind back to the Whisper Network for 1 second
Sure.
and just share that when we were on the road for the last 6 months talking about our book, we spoke at all of these different schools and in all of these different settings. And there's one point in the talk when Vanessa will say, find your own trusted adult. We always tell kids to find their trusted adults. We have to find ours. And that is the line that gets the most reaction, usually claps and giggles, but it's the Whisper Network. And it is critical for parents and trusted adults or kids' trusted adults to know that they need their own whisper or yelling network. It doesn't it can be at any volume, right?
Yeah.
And I do want to shine a little light on that advice that you give, because even just the act of reaching out to someone, even if they have no resources for you, the ability to be in conversation with someone else and share your load and have someone listen it's huge. It makes such a big difference when you're feeling like you're the only one whose kid is handling something, or like there are other people who are handling the same thing, but you're, for whatever reason, isolated in your approach to it with that kid.
That's beautiful. And the fact that gets the biggest audible response really shows us that we are desperate for connection.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Parenting is so isolating. In fact, parenting middle schoolers is the most isolating. There's been research around that. But parenting teens and middle schoolers, I will lump them together for the sake of this conversation and say, is a very lonely experience. And people responding that way tells us we need that. We crave that like water. And so, to your point, even if someone doesn't have the resource for you, they for sure can have empathy. They can sure have connection with you, and we're craving it.
Michelle, can you ground our listeners in why failure is important? We've talked about like what it feels like, and we've all been there. I was there last night twice, in case you were wondering, not once, but twice with my middle schooler. God bless him. There was great success this morning, however, because one lost item was found. And so everyone listening, don't worry. It was found. Why is it important for kids to fail? And before we talk about solutions and handling and all of that, why does it help them grow? Why is it good for them to fail?
So the idea isn't this sort of commonly held belief, which is a good belief, which is a fine belief, that we learn from our mistakes. That's right-ish, but it's not enough. Really, and it's not just enough to say, oh, you'll grow from this. What I want parents to understand is that in order to grow up and become an adult, your child has to go through a set of 4 phases. The first is they have to separate from you or their group of friends or their community. They have to individuate. And so they have to pull away. And that looks different in different cultures, and it looks different across time and across geography, but the concept remains the same and has been the same forever. Kids need to individuate. They need to pull apart. So they have to pull out and be on their own. When they're on their own, they have to face some kind of a challenge or a test. Maybe it's a social test. Maybe it's an academic test. Maybe it's a sort of bodily test, and what I mean by that is maybe they have to try to make a touchdown for the team. Maybe they have to travel alone and find out how to get there on their own. Maybe they have to stick up for somebody who's being teased. But in some way, they face a unique challenge to their body or to their sort of moral code or their message. And then, because they're alone and they're doing this for the first time, we talked about how messy this is, they often screw up. They often make a bad choice. They fail at this experience. But what happens next is they learn from it. They learn something about themselves. I'm someone who doesn't like that feeling of making fun of someone when I'm in a group. I'm someone who shouldn't party before a big football game. Whatever it is that they learn, because I let my team down and I felt terrible. Whatever it is, they learn an important lesson and they grow from that. And then two things happen. They become a better person. Their community becomes a better community because it has this new member, this new young adult who's learned about themselves. So it's this kind of cycle, a rite of passage that we're starting to get really, it's lost on us now, the concept of a rite of passage. I think typically what we do now is we just say, we mark it by time. You're 13, you can get on Instagram. You're 15, you can get a learner's permit. You're 16, here are the keys to the car. You're 18, you can stay out till midnight. So we look at it as a sense of timing, and we are not looking at the true meaning of a rite of passage, which is you have to separate, you have to screw up, you have to learn from it, and then you come back to the group a better version of yourself. So that's the failure that I'm really celebrating in this book.
Can you explain, by extension, the idea of learned helplessness?
Yeah.
And how that fits into this?
Absolutely. So this
Vanessa laughing hard over there.
I mean, learned helpless. I feel like I should just have a t-shirt that says like, I live in a house full of people with learned helplessness.
We can get those sweaters embroidered, those lingua.
I know I feel like that phrase is too long for the embroidered sweaters, but like, I reside with learned helplessness. I mean, something like that.
You feel like it should be like the 8th stage for Gardner, like all those different, not stage, but you know how Gardner has those 7 types of learners?
Yes.
The 8th type of learner should be a helpless learner.
So essentially, this is a concept that comes out of primarily the work of Marty Seligman, who did 5 decades of research into how we respond to pain and discomfort. And what he discovered is that our sort of primary innate reaction to feeling discomfort is to accept it and suffer through it, unless we have an experience, a pretty easy, quick one, where we learn, oh, I can do something about this pain.
Mm-hmm.
So if a feeling of pain or discomfort or failure is so monumental and we feel like we have to get it perfect in order to fix that, that's not helpful to kids. But in his experiments, I'll give you a really quick synopsis because I think it's helpful for parents to envision this. College kids go into one room. They hear a horrible noise that is so irritating and torturous. There's a button on the wall. If they go press the button once, nothing happens. If they jam it and the 4th time they hit it, the noise stops. They have relief. They go, oh, I can stop this painful experience. The next group of college kids, they go into a room. They hear the same noise. They have a button on the wall, but it doesn't work. So they press and press and press and press. And what they learn is, I can't stop this pain or discomfort. I will suffer in silence until it ends. The 3rd group, I'm not going to go into all the iterations because it'll cloud up this conversation. But then they take those same groups, they put them in a room again with another terrible noise, and instead of a
like
button,
a ringing telephone at home that might need to be answered, for instance. Yes.
Just like grating on your nerves. And the first group that would press the button 4 times and stop the noise, they go in, they hear the noise, they see a lever this time. They pull the lever back and forth and stop the noise. Victory. They know how to do it. The second group goes in. Their button didn't work. They see the lever and they don't even bother. They just look at that lever and go, another terrible situation for me. I will endure it until the experimenter comes and gets me. So what we know is that we learn to be helpless really fast. It doesn't take much. And we give up and we endure pain and suffering in silence unless we have an experience in which we learn, we don't break, we bounce, we can try something and see if it works. So we want to give kids loads and loads of opportunity to screw up and fail so that they learn that taking even a baby step can be helpful to them and they don't just become helpless.
So this is the point at which, as I was reading your book, I wanted to just have a megaphone and amplify this message. So for the listeners, if you take nothing else from this conversation, take the advice that you are hearing. The advice you are hearing is truly, if you do everything for your child, they not only don't have the opportunity to fail, but they learn helplessness, right? And the thing that every parent and adult wants for the kids that they love is for them to thrive on their own as independent beings. So this is why you hear this advice over and over and over again. And it is not the fast or easy or clean path. It is not. I mean, before we got on, we're managing summer schedules and trying to figure out things. And I've got an 18-year-old who needs to be places. And I just said, it is on you to take everything to the point of almost booking it. And then you got to run it by me and tell me your decision tree. And it took 5 times longer than me just doing it. And yet he will never learn the process of what he'll learn is I should just grab the first flight I can grab. And it doesn't really matter how much it costs or what the logistics are. I'm not thinking about this, that, and the other because, there's no accountability to that. So to me, what you highlight early in your book across social media all the time, frankly, and to audiences where you speak is there's failure on the one hand that's important. And there's learned helplessness on the other. And that is equally important to steer around. It takes effort. Is that fair?
Oh gosh, that was perfect. And really, I want parents to think about this like exercise. You build muscle by tearing and repairing. And your child needs to tear and repair many, many times to get stronger, not just physically, but mentally. They have to have a breakdown. They have to collapse. They have to think this is just too hard. I can't do it. And our job as the parents, I use this analogy in the book, you're like greenhouse keepers. You make your home into this cozy little space, like a greenhouse, where you have created a perfect nurturing environment for your kid to grow. And then you open the door to the greenhouse, just like greenhouse keepers do. They take their little plants and they put them outside in the freezing cold and they shrivel up and they hate the way that feels. And then they bring them back into the greenhouse. So your job is not to make life uncomfortable for your child. Your job is to open the door to the world, let them go out there, let them mess up, feel embarrassment, have regret, understand pain, and then come back into the soft, warm comfort of your home.
So Michelle, let's add on to this concept with the concept of risk taking.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the criticality of risk taking for adolescents. Why is it so, and for our listeners, many of you will be able to answer this question before Michelle does, but what is it about this age that makes risk taking so appealing? And how do we as caregivers and trusted adults allow for some degree of risk taking, foster this sort of beneficial risk taking, and draw a line in front of the scary, really worrisome risk taking?
Well, I will say you guys perfectly describe the sort of brain sequencing of why this happens in your book. So the bit about the myelin and how, some messages are traveling faster than others. I love that part of your book. This is so awkward. So that is a really great way for parents to understand impulsivity and how kids are just making some decisions faster than other. And so with the way that the brain is rewiring, you've got kids in adolescence who are drawn towards riskier behavior, faster, impulsive thought process. Part of it is brain rewiring in that way, and part of it is as they individuate and separate from their people, their home people, they need to find more of a community, and that's going to consist of peers. They understand that we were their nest that they are launching from, but we are not their future. Their future is with them at school. And so they need to figure out how to be perceived well. And often their brains are not good at evaluating whether a risk is good or bad. They simply think, if I do this, it will be epic and people will love me and they will talk about it. And so they're willing to do the crazy thing for the payoff. They overvalue the social reward of being seen as cool. And they don't slow down and think about whether or not what they're going to do might actually cause them to get hurt in one of many ways. So they are quick to jump on that, and they are fast to want to impress their friends. The good news is, as scary as all of that sounds, kids' brains need to take risk, and they are equally satisfied by what we would consider to be positive risks as what we would consider to be negative risks. So if we can fill their lives with opportunity to do things that are scary to them, that make their stomach flutter and tie up in knots, that checks the box for them. They are less likely to do things that are dangerous. The trick is we don't really get to pick what's scary and exciting to our kids. So a lot of times parents will say, well, I checked that box. My kid plays sports. And I'm like,
and you're like, oh, honey,
that might not do it for your kid, But so I tell parents to tiptoe to the edge of their comfort zone and then to take 2 more steps and let their that.
But what about things like alcohol, drugs, extreme sports? I don't know. I'm trying to think of the really
can I read I feel like you knew what I was underlining in this book, because this is the tee up to what Vanessa is about to ask. You have this amazing description of your words are, your teen's brain doesn't differentiate between what we adults think of as good risks and bad risks. It craves all risk equally, period. And around that statement, you get into some detail about like whether they're speeding to get to school or to get to a social event, whether it's how they operate on social media, whether it's drinking to look cool, whether it's organizing a club at school, starting a small business, like all of it shares a lowest common denominator in the brain. And that common denominator is like this dopamine rush that's going, this feels good, this feels good, this feels good. So then to Vanessa's question, right? And Vanessa, I think the framing of your question is like, but they know the consequences a little bit more, right? They've been in conversation about this stuff.
Right. And also like it's understandable that they're interested in these things. It's also understandable that we're
not
worried. And as you said, Michelle, we can't control it. We can't dictate the circumstances in which they find themselves. I mean, we can set up some limits and parameters that might help a little bit, but how do we allow for risk taking? The concept of like go to the edge of your comfort zone and then take 2 steps in. Where do we say, you know what, I'm not going past the edge of my comfort zone. I'm sticking right here. And where do we say, okay, I'll wade in a little bit further? How do we determine that?
Yeah. So obviously going to be really different for different people in different families. I think you're going to think about safety, of course. And here's the tricky part. People think about safety so differently. I run this parenting group with 13,000 members online, and some of them are like, I would never let my kid go to the mall. And some of them are like, I would never let my kid have a social media account. And some of them are like, I would never let my kid travel alone. And these are all things that I would let my kid do. Like those don't seem super unsafe to me, but for them, it's different. So very hard to have a kind of universal barometer for it. So that's why I'm saying it's more of a get to where you're comfortable and then think, can I go 2 steps further here? Now, if your child is coming home drunk on the weekends and they're 15 years old, you're not going to say, I'm going to go 2 steps further. And this time you can drive yourself to that party, right? So it's not that, but it is, there are a couple things that I think we can be doing around that. One is, obviously, you're not comfortable with that level of risk. Is there another part of their life where they can be taking more risk? Are they taking extra risk here because they're not getting enough dopamine hits elsewhere in their life? Have you guys listened to sidebar or read the Paris Hilton book that just came out?
No.
But I'm really impressed that you did.
It's so good. I'm listening to it right now on audio, and she talks about she was super ADHD kid and craved dopamine and would sneak out of her house and go to clubs when she was 14 in New York. And she said, I never drank, I never smoked, I never did any of those things, but I was under such lockdown and my life was under such scrutiny and I didn't have opportunities to take other risks. And I was desperate to get out there and live life a little bit. So when I say take your 2 steps further, maybe you need to look in a different direction and step further.
Interesting.
And what do you say to the parents who are setting rules that are, I don't want to use the word unreasonable because that's judgmental, but like they're unrealistic.
Yeah.
If I'm going to keep my kid off social media and they're in 7th grade, 8th grade, then 9th grade, then 10th grade, then 11th grade. I mean, there's a point at which, unless the kid is opting into this behavior, that is their social currency. That is the way kids communicate now. And so they're going to do a runaround and they're going to be on social media and they're just not going to engage their parents on it. What advice for parents who are really certain that the safety risks are so big that they have to set this rigid rule, even if it feels unreasonable?
My advice to the parent is you've got to do the work. You've got to dig really deep and think about what you're afraid of. This relates back to that fear triage. So if you're saying, I don't want my kid on social media, I want to know why. And I don't want to know why so I can argue with you. I want to know why so you can get to the point that you can mitigate for that. So if you're not letting your kid on social media because you think they're going to be sex trafficked, or you're not letting them on social media because your child had problems with disordered eating and you're afraid how that's going to affect their health, very different reasons for not letting your kid on social media. Maybe there's another reason. Maybe you don't want them on there because you don't want them to exposed to differing points of view or whatever it might be. You've got to be really honest with yourself and you've got to list out, what am I actually afraid of? Because by keeping them off social media, I might be feeding them into that fear somewhere else. You know, maybe they're not meeting a stranger online. Maybe they're meeting up with a person they met at the mall, you know. So I think it's all up to the parents to really dig deep. And when you make a blanket statement, I'm not going to let my kid think X, believe X, want to X, do X. What's underlying that?
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the risk of keeping things so locked down that kids do things secretly, right? That life becomes clandestine, which is not safe for them and doesn't allow us to be caring, trusted adults in their lives. So I just want to highlight that flip side of when you really, really lock down, kids are still going to seek out opportunities to take risks. They just may do it in hidden ways, which makes it even more unsafe, which brings me, Michelle, to the concept you talk about, which I so love because it is really consistent with our sort of positive, optimistic philosophy around caring for adolescents. And you talk about the adolescent Bill of Rights. And by the way, I'm like totally not showing this to my kids because it's like all I'm ever going to hear about if I'm like, did you know that you guys have a Bill of Rights and I have to like respect and litigate according to that Bill of Rights? But can you talk about what the Bill of Rights is and why that reframe of providing kids rights as opposed to instilling restrictions and limitations on them is such an important way of kind of reimagining the relationship of individuating kids in our homes?
So the Bill of Rights is mimicked off of our Bill of Rights, of course. And it's this concept that kids have inherent rights to certain things, to a certain amount of privacy, to choose their friends and not have them chosen for them, to take risk, as we discussed. And so there are a variety of things that kids really should have rights and access to. And then there will be times when, just like with ours, our Constitution, they screw up and they lose access to those rights. But what I want parents to take from the book and from this model is that if you want your child to grow, you have to give them the rights back at some point. Now, you don't just give it over. There is a sort of a 3-step process in the book of how, there's a problem, you contain it, then your child works to resolve it, then you evolve past it. So it's almost like a tennis ball going back and forth on a court. You do something, they do something, you do something. And at that point, when you are evolving past this failure, whatever it might have been, your kid kept coming home drunk, or your kid was talking to strangers online, or whatever it might have been, they need access to their rights again. They need that so they can practice. It's just like it's horrible. I don't know if when your kids were learning how to drive, if they had an accident, but I had an accident early on. And I'm sure my parents were like, do we have to let her again? But
right.
You have to let them again. And so they need those rights to try. And you need to be prepared that they might have another accident. And that's how life is. And that's how we learn and grow. But without the rights and without practice, it's actually messier in the long run. So it's better to absorb some of that mess while they're still at home.
And it felt to me like the kids themselves actually don't need to participate in a conversation about what their rights are, although in some homes, that's the most productive way to do it.
Yeah.
But in some homes, it's just for the adults to recognize that when you don't grant kids these rights, it does often backfire. It does often land you in a place you don't want the relationship with your kid or your kid to land.
That's right. And so much of parenting is wondering, right? What do I do now? And so I'm hoping that the sort of practicality of having this Bill of Rights, of having this contain, resolve, evolve, some of these things answer that question so that that feeling of I'm alone out here, I'm swimming without any help goes away a little bit. I mean, what I want to do is provide relief and say, you're not alone. You aren't the first person to experience this. And here's a little nudge in the right direction if you're feeling that way. That's what those are for.
So let's land on success and what success looks like, because we started with failure, which is really important, but it would be nice to be able to throw a positive frame, and you have an incredible frame around this. Can you talk about success a little bit?
So success for me is, it's not data driven. It's surely not about grades. It's not about college admission. It's not about salary. It's not about anything like that. For me, success is based on a child feeling fulfillment and happiness and a sense of value. So a child feels successful when they can make a contribution to their community. And their community might be their family. It might be their pack of friends. It might be their team. It might be their classmates. But in some way, in some community, it doesn't have to be every community, they have to feel like they are making a contribution. And when my kids were in middle school and they were high school and they were playing team sports, my husband used to say to them, when I played sports, I was never the best person on the team. So I made sure I was always the best teammate because that's what I knew I could contribute. I was great at getting people psyched, get them all like hyped up before a game. I was good at cheering people on. So figure out wherever it is in their community, what it is that they can contribute of value. From that comes a sense of fulfillment and comes a sense of growing responsibility, which gives a person, a higher sense of self-esteem. So that's really what I'm driving for with this idea of feeling success.
And it's not always the adult figuring it out. It's often, as the kids get older, the kids themselves figuring out and being able to share and articulate with the adults around them.
And it's often the adults resisting because the adult might say, but video games but makeup tutorials, I don't get it. This doesn't seem like it's valuable. But if your child gets something from that and they can contribute something of value to their community, that's success. So we need to really watch them.
What I love about that, Michelle, is it's not about exceptionalism. Right. It is about just human day-to-day sense of belonging and commitment and contribution. And I got to tell you, it is so refreshing to hear your definition of success. And I'm going to share it with my kids. I'm not sharing the Bill of Rights, but I am sharing the definition of success because all of a sudden I feel like they're going to say that I can do, that I feel, maybe not on a daily basis, but in any given week, I have that feeling of success. And I think we really need more of that, more reimagining and reframing, A, what failure is, and that we can come back from it, and B, what success looks like. So thank you for joining us. You are the book is delightful. You are delightful. We know parents are going to feel so reassured by everything that you share. And I think, this might be the first time that someone has referred to our book as the good source for a particular topic on their from their book.
Which feels like success to me. Let me just say,
but
that's how I measure success right there.
Our editor will be very happy that we're referring to each other's books in the conversation.
They look cute together, everyone.
They do. They look good. We were very organized. Michelle, please come back and talk to us some more. And if folks don't follow Michelle, on Instagram. She's got a great account. It's so affirming and it makes you feel good. And there's always a wonderful nugget. So don't just buy her book, but also check out her Instagram account. And come back and visit us.
Anytime. Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you so much for listening. You can email us with questions, feedback, or episode requests at podcast@lessawkward.com.
If you want to learn more about what we do to make this whole stage of life less awkward for everyone involved, our parent membership, our school health ed curriculum, our keynote talks, and more are all at lessawkward.com.
And if you want products that make puberty so much more comfortable, visit myumla.com.